A 10-foot giant was dug from the earth in 1869. Was it proof of an ancient race or a brilliant lie? You are about to discover the true story of the Cardiff Giant, a tale that reveals how easily desire can override evidence. You will learn the secrets behind one of America's greatest hoaxes and the shocking reasons it fooled scientists and the public alike. We will uncover how a single man exploited a nation's spiritual anxieties and how a legendary showman tried to steal the sensation. By the end, you will understand the powerful psychological forces that make us believe the unbelievable. What is one story you were certain was true, only to later discover it was a complete fabrication. America in the 1860s was a nation grappling with profound questions. The Civil War had left deep scars, creating a collective grief that fueled a desperate search for comfort and meaning. Spiritualism, the belief that the living could communicate with the dead, swept across the country. Seances and spirit mediums became commonplace in parlors from New York to the frontier, offering a tantalizing promise of connection to a world beyond our own. At the very same time, a powerful wave of biblical literalism held sway over many, with congregations taking every word of Scripture as historical fact. This included a single, intriguing verse from the book of Genesis that spoke of giants who once walked the earth. Can you imagine the potent mixture these two forces created? A public was already primed to believe in the unseen and the miraculous, and they were literally reading about ancient giants in their holy books. Then came the new science of archaeology, unearthing mysterious mounds and fossils across the continent, suggesting a deep and forgotten American history. It was into this perfect storm of spiritual yearning and scientific curiosity that the Cardiff Giant was born. The public was not just ready for such a discovery, they were actively longing for it. They wanted tangible proof that the world was stranger and more wondrous than it appeared, a physical link to a mythic past that could make sense of a turbulent present. This was the fertile ground where a simple seed of a lie could grow into an enormous, unbelievable truth. Into this world of fervent belief stepped a man named George Hull. He was not a spiritual seeker or a pious farmer, but a shrewd and cynical cigar manufacturer from New York. Hull was also a staunch atheist, a man who viewed the rising tide of religious fundamentalism with deep skepticism and no small amount of contempt. His grand scheme, the one that would become the Cardiff Giant, was born from a single, heated argument. Hull had been debating scripture with a fundamentalist Methodist preacher, a man named Turk. The preacher clung with absolute certainty to a literal interpretation of the Bible, including the verse from Genesis that stated, "There were giants in the earth in those days." Hull, frustrated by what he saw as blind faith, decided to craft the ultimate rebuttal. He would not argue with words, he would create evidence. His plan was a monumental prank, designed to expose how easily people could be fooled by their own desire to believe. If a preacher was so sure giants existed, Hull would give him one. He would manufacture a fake fossil and watch as the very religious leaders he disdained fell for his deception, proving that their faith was built on a foundation of gullibility. This was not merely a business venture for profit, though profit would certainly follow. It was a personal, almost philosophical mission driven by a cynical desire to pull back the curtain on belief itself. He wanted to demonstrate that if you presented people with something that perfectly matched their expectations, they would willingly suspend all disbelief, ignoring every obvious flaw in favor of a comfortable, miraculous truth. The argument with Reverend Turk left George Hull simmering with a new kind of ambition. It was no longer enough to simply disbelieve, he felt compelled to act, to prove his point in the most dramatic way possible. That single biblical verse, "There were giants in the earth in those days," echoed in his mind not as scripture but as a challenge. He would give the people exactly what they want to see. The idea crystallized into a concrete plan, a work of artful deception that would hold a mirror to the public's faith. This would not be a cheap trick, It required a substantial investment of both money and cunning. Hull committed a staggering sum for the time, the modern equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars, to turn his philosophical argument into a physical reality. He was not merely spending money, he was funding an elaborate experiment on human nature itself. He traveled to Fort Dodge, Iowa, and personally selected a massive block of gypsum, a soft, pale stone that could be easily carved. He then hired a team of stonecutters in Chicago, spinning them a tale about needing a statue for a patriotic monument. The men worked for days, carefully chiseling the form of a massive, muscular man, over 10 feet long, with one arm draped across its chest. But a fresh statue would never pass for an ancient fossil, so Hull and his co-conspirators devised a method to age their creation. They stained the giant with sulfuric acid to give it a weathered, earthy patina. They then hammered the surface with darning needles set in a block of wood, creating thousands of tiny pores that mimicked the texture of human skin. They even used mallet heads to simulate the pores of sweat glands, an obsessive attention to detail meant to deceive the most careful observer. Every step was calculated, every dollar spent with the specific intent of creating an object so convincing it would override logic. The giant was no longer just a block of stone, it was a weapon, carefully forged to test the very foundations of belief. George Hull needed the perfect stone for his grand deception. His search led him to the gypsum quarries of Fort Dodge, Iowa, a place famous for its rich deposits of the pale, soft mineral. Gypsum was the ideal choice for several very practical reasons. Its relative softness meant it could be carved with much greater detail and ease than harder stones like granite, allowing artisans to sculpt the fine features of a humanoid giant. More importantly, when treated and stained, its fine-grained texture and color could be made to look astonishingly like petrified human skin and muscle. It was the raw material for a convincing illusion. Securing the block itself was a monumental task. Hull arranged for the quarrymen to extract a single, enormous slab of gypsum measuring over 12 feet long and weighing several tons. The sheer weight and size of the stone presented an immediate and immense logistical challenge. How do you secretly move a multi-ton block of stone across the country without raising suspicions? Hull's solution was as clever as it was costly. He had the colossal slab carefully loaded onto a specially reinforced wagon for the slow, difficult journey to the nearest railroad line. From there, it was shipped by rail to Chicago, a long and expensive trip hidden in plain sight among other freight. To any curious onlookers, it was just another industrial shipment, a piece of raw material destined for some unknown project. But for George Hull, this was no ordinary cargo. That massive block of Iowa gypsum was the blank canvas upon which he would paint his masterpiece of lies, the very foundation of a hoax that would soon captivate a nation. The colossal block of Iowa gypsum finally arrived at its secret destination, a secluded barn on the outskirts of Chicago. Inside, a team of stonecutters, led by a German sculptor named Edward Burgart, set to work. They were told they were creating a memorial statue for a patriotic monument, a story George Hull carefully crafted to ensure their cooperation and silence. Their tools were simple yet effective, the same chisels, mallets, and rasps used for generations to shape stone. For days, the only sounds in that hidden barn were the rhythmic tapping of hammers and the gritty scrape of metal on gypsum, slowly revealing the form hidden within the pale block. They worked with painstaking care, carving the defined musculature of a massive 10-foot man. They sculpted a brooding face with a strong jaw, a powerful torso, and limbs thick with sinew. One arm was carefully draped across the chest, a pose that would later be interpreted as one of eternal rest or sudden petrification, but creating a realistic statue was only the first step. A freshly carved figure, no matter how skillfully made, would never be mistaken for an ancient fossil. It needed a history, a false life of thousands of years, etched onto its surface. This is where Hull's deception became truly ingenious. To simulate centuries of burial, they stained the entire figure with a dark, oily wash made from sulfuric acid and ground ink. This gave the pale gypsum a deep, earthy, aged complexion. Then, to mimic the porous texture of human skin, they used a bizarre but effective tool, thousands of darning needles set into a wooden block. By hammering this pincushion-like block across the giant's body, they created a landscape of tiny pores. Finally, they took polished wooden mallet heads and pressed them repeatedly into the skin, leaving behind subtle, rounded indentations that looked exactly like the openings of sweat glands. Every single mark was a calculated lie, a detail designed to convince the most skeptical eye that this was not a sculpture, but a being. With the giant's form complete, the real artistry of deception began. A statue carved yesterday could never pass for an ancient relic, so Hull initiated a meticulous process of fictional aging. The pale, smooth gypsum was first transformed through chemistry. They drenched the entire figure in a concoction of sulfuric acid and ground ink, a corrosive bath that ate away at the stone's smooth surface. This chemical attack did more than just darken the gypsum to a deep, earthy brown. It created a rough, pitted texture that perfectly mimicked the appearance of stone that had been buried for millennia. The giant no longer looked carved, it looked excavated. But the most bizarre and ingenious step was still to come. To simulate the fine pores of human skin, the conspirators employed a tool more commonly found in a 19th century sewing basket: darning needles. They hammered a wooden block studded with thousands of these tiny needles across the giant's entire body. Each tap drove countless pinpricks into the soft stone, creating a landscape of microscopic pores that caught the light and shadow just like real skin. Finally, they used the rounded heads of wooden mallets, pressing and grinding them into the surface to create the subtle indentations of sweat glands. Every single mark was a deliberate forgery, a crafted piece of evidence designed to survive the closest inspection. This was not a rushed job, it was a patient, obsessive project to breathe a false history into inert stone, creating an object so perfectly aged that it would blind viewers to the truth staring them in the face. The giant was now a perfect fake, but it needed a perfect grave. Under the cover of night in late 1868, the massive, 10-foot-long crate began its secret journey from Chicago. It traveled by rail and then by wagon, a slow and treacherous trip to a small, unassuming farm in the quiet town of Cardiff, New York. This was the property of William Stubb Newell, a distant cousin of George Hull and a willing partner in the scheme. In the dead of night, Hull, Newell, and a few trusted helpers buried the giant in a shallow pit near Newell's barn, a spot they knew would one day attract attention. They carefully placed the stone man on its back, facing the sky, and covered it with fresh soil, planting a seed of deception that would take a full year to sprout. They waited, letting the earth settle and the seasons change, allowing the land to forget the disturbance. Then, on the morning of October 16, 1869, the performance began. Newell hired two well diggers, Gideon Emmons and Henry Nichols, to dig a new well precisely where the giant was buried. As their shovels bit into the earth, they struck something hard. They cleared away the dirt, and there it was, a massive stone man. A hushed awe fell over them, quickly replaced by excited shouts. They had not just found an oddity, they had uncovered a petrified giant. Newell, playing his part perfectly, acted with a mix of shock and reverence. He immediately declared the site sacred and spread straw across the giant to protect it, a gesture that made the discovery feel all the more profound and real. Word spread through the small community like wildfire, and by that very afternoon, farmers and neighbors were flocking to Stubb Newell's farm, their minds reeling with a single, electrifying question. Just what had they found buried in the quiet earth of Cardiff? The shovel struck stone with a dull, heavy thud that echoed up Gideon Emmont's arms. He and Henry Nichols exchanged a puzzled look, their well digging for the day suddenly interrupted by something far more solid than the usual clay and roots. They knelt, clearing the dark earth away with their hands, their curiosity quickly turning to disbelief. The shape of a massive shoulder emerged, then a broad chest, a powerful neck, and finally, a stony face gazing sightlessly at the sky. They had not hit a boulder, they had uncovered a giant. A hush fell between them, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Then a single, excited shout shattered the quiet, drawing Stub Newell from his farmhouse. He arrived to see the two men standing over the colossal figure, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. Newell, playing his part with masterful calm, surveyed the scene with a reverent gravity. He declared the ground hallowed and immediately ordered straw to be spread over the giant, a protective gesture that transformed the pit from a simple hole into a sacred site. The news did not just spread, it exploded. By that afternoon, the Newell farm was swarming with people. Farmers left their plows in the field, wives abandoned their washing, and children ran ahead, all converging on a single point in the landscape. They pressed in close, their voices a low, excited hum as they stared at the petrified man in the earth. The theories began to fly immediately. Some declared it a grand hoax, but they were swiftly shouted down. The most popular and thrilling explanation took hold, that this was a petrified human being, a giant from a bygone age, exactly as the Bible described. The sheer physicality of the giant, its shocking size and unsettlingly human features, made disbelief feel almost sacrilegious. It was not just a strange rock, it was a confirmation, a miracle made of stone, and everyone who saw it that day became a fervent believer, a living spark ready to carry the fire of the story far beyond the borders of their small town. The wave of awe from that Cardiff farm quickly reached the ears of men of science. Doctors and professors arrived, their own eyes widening at the sight of the 10-foot figure. A local physician, Dr. Amos Westcott, examined the giant meticulously. He noted the defined muscles, the texture of the skin, and the subtle pores. He declared with confidence that it was indeed a petrified man, a genuine fossil of immense antiquity. His professional opinion was like gasoline on the fire of public belief. Another expert, a paleontologist from a nearby college named John F. Boynton, initially suggested it might be an ancient statue, but even he was captivated. He later changed his assessment, swayed by the sheer physical detail, and conceded it could be a petrified human being. These were not foolish men, they were educated professionals using their training, yet the giant's careful craftsmanship deceived them. It perfectly matched their expectations of what an ancient giant should look like, but a few voices of dissent did emerge. A geologist named James Hall pointed out the stone was gypsum, a mineral not found in the local bedrock, a glaring clue that the giant was not native to that field. A sculptor from Syracuse named John G. Gifford took one look and proclaimed it a modern creation, a well-executed statue, but a statue nonetheless. Yet these logical objections were largely drowned out by the public's roaring desire for the story to be true. People wanted to believe they were witnessing a biblical miracle, a tangible piece of a lost world. When faced with a choice between a mundane explanation from a scientist and a miraculous one from a farmer, the miracle won every time. The giant was no longer just an object in the ground. It had become a test of faith against fact. And in those early days, faith was proving overwhelmingly powerful. Stub Newell's farm was soon overrun. What began as a trickle of local farmers became a flood of visitors from neighboring towns, all jostling for a glimpse of the petrified man. The quiet field was turning into a chaotic fairground, and Newell, with George Hull surely advising from the shadows, saw an opportunity. A simple wooden fence went up around the pit. Then a large tent was erected over the giant itself, transforming the excavation site into a proper exhibition hall. This was no longer a free spectacle, it was a business. Newell began charging an admission fee, first 25 cents, then 50 cents as demand skyrocketed. People were not just willing to pay, they were eager, handing over their coins for the privilege of witnessing a biblical legend made flesh, or rather, made stone. The local newspapers were the first to fuel the fire. printing breathless accounts of the discovery, but the story was too incredible to remain local. Reporters from major papers in Syracuse and Utica arrived, and their syndicated stories spread the legend of the Cardiff Giant across the entire nation. It became a front-page sensation from New York to Chicago. Editorial pages debated its origins, cartoons depicted the giant in humorous situations, and every new article brought another wave of curious travelers to the little town of Cardiff. The giant was no longer a local oddity, it was a national media circus, a shared cultural moment that captivated a country desperate for wonder. How did a simple stone figure command such attention? It offered something no sermon or scientific journal could, a physical object you could stand before, a mystery you could touch, and a story that felt truer than reality itself. The Cardiff Giant was no longer just a spectacle, it was a financial engine roaring to life. Stubb Newell's simple admission fee was only the beginning. As the crowd swelled to hundreds, then thousands of people every single day, the 50-cent ticket price generated a staggering cash flow. The Giant was earning more in a week than most farms did in an entire year, a river of coins flowing directly into the pockets of George Hull and his cousin. But they were not content to simply collect tickets. Hull, ever the shrewd businessman, saw even greater potential. He decided to sell the Giant itself, or at least a piece of it. A syndicate of 5 local businessmen, utterly convinced of the Giant's authenticity and its money-making power, pooled their resources and purchased a 3/4 interest in the phenomenon for a jaw-dropping sum, the modern equivalent of well over $100,000. They were buying not just a strange statue, but a proven, crowd-pulling enterprise. The Giant was literally paying for itself many times over, its value inflated by the very belief it was designed to mock. And the public's appetite for the Giant seemed limitless. Entrepreneurs rushed to meet the demand, creating a bustling market of souvenirs. You could buy detailed photographic prints of the stony figure, pamphlets that detailed its miraculous discovery, and even miniature plaster replicas to take home. The Giant was no longer a single object buried in a field. It was a brand, a cultural touchstone that people were willing to pay to see, to own, and to believe in. The philosophical prank had transformed into an incredibly lucrative industry, all built upon a foundation of cleverly carved gypsum and a public's desperate desire for a miracle. Of course, no sensation of this magnitude could escape the notice of the greatest showman on earth, the legendary P.T. Barnum, whose very name was synonymous with spectacle and curiosity, heard the national uproar over the Cardiff Giant and immediately saw its potential. He dispatched an agent to New York with a simple, ambitious mission to purchase the Giant outright and bring it into his world-famous American Museum. But the syndicate of businessmen who now owned the Giant refused to sell. They were making a fortune and saw no reason to hand their golden goose over to a competitor. A lesser man might have conceded defeat, but Barnum was a master of turning obstacles into opportunities. If he could not have the original, he would create his own. He immediately hired a skilled sculptor to produce a near-perfect plaster replica of the Cardiff Giant. Barnum's copy was crafted with astonishing speed and precision, a testament to his relentless drive. He then unveiled his own Giant in New York City, boldly advertising it as the one and only genuine article. He even had the audacity to label the original upstate attraction as a cheap fake. This created a bizarre and hilarious competition. Now the public was presented with 2 nearly identical Giants, each claiming to be the real petrified man, with their owners engaged in a war of words through the press. The hoax had birthed a rival, and the absurdity reached a new peak. People now had to choose which Giant to believe in, a situation that perfectly exposed how the spectacle itself had become more important than the truth. Barnum understood something profound about the public. They did not necessarily want authenticity, they wanted the best story, and he was always prepared to sell it to them. The absurdity of two giants now reached the New York State Supreme Court. The outraged owners of the original Cardiff Giant, the very men who had paid a fortune for their share of the hoax, filed a lawsuit against P.T. Barnum. Their claim was one of breathtaking irony. They sued him for publicly calling their giant a fake. The courtroom became a theater of the surreal, where the architects of a lie were now forced to defend its truth under oath. George Hull, the mastermind, found himself in an impossible position. To win the case and protect his investment, he had to convince a judge and jury that the giant was a genuine petrified man, a claim he knew to be an absolute falsehood. The trial unfolded as a farcical inversion of justice. Lawyers for the owners presented enthusiastic testimony from local farmers and even the original well diggers, all swearing to the authenticity of their incredible discovery. They argued that Barnum's false advertisements were damaging their legitimate business. Barnum's defense, in turn, gleefully set out to prove that both giants were fakes, a task made easier by the sheer ridiculousness of the plaintiff's position. The judge, perhaps sensing the deeper folly at play, ultimately refused to issue an injunction against Barnum. His reasoning was a masterpiece of legal pragmatism. He declared that since both parties were essentially exhibiting humbugs, the court could not determine which humbug was the more genuine. This ruling was a devastating blow, not because it ended the spectacle, but because it stripped the original giant of its last shred of credibility. The courtroom, a place dedicated to uncovering truth, had instead publicly exposed the entire enterprise as a sham. The legal battle did not kill the giant's popularity overnight, but it let the air out slowly, allowing doubt to seep into the public consciousness and setting the stage for the final, undeniable confession. The courtroom farce could not contain the giant's secret forever. While lawyers argued over which humbug was more genuine, a far more dangerous threat to the hoax was emerging: the cold, methodical gaze of real science. The most devastating blow came from one of the most respected paleontologists in the country, Professor Othniel C. Marsh of Yale University. He traveled to Cardiff and examined the giant with a professional's dispassionate eye, and what he saw was not a miracle, but a fraud. He immediately identified the stone as gypsum, a soft mineral that would never have survived the thousands of years of weathering claimed for it. More damningly, his trained eye picked out the faint but unmistakable marks of modern carving tools. He declared the giant a most decided humbug, and his word carried immense weight. At the same time, intrepid newspaper reporters, acting as 19th-century investigative journalists, began to follow the money and the stone. They traced a path from the Cardiff farm all the way back to a stonecutter's shop in Chicago, and the trail ultimately led them to a cigar manufacturer from New York, George Hull. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with undeniable logic. How could a giant be authentic if the stone it was made from was not even native to the region? How could it be ancient if a Yale professor could see the fresh chisel marks? The mounting evidence from both science and journalism created a pincer movement, squeezing the life out of the wonderful story. The public, which had so eagerly embraced the giant, now found itself confronted with a much less exciting truth: that they had been masterfully duped by a man with a grudge and a clever plan. Faced with an unraveling web of evidence and the cold verdict of science, George Hull finally saw no reason to continue the charade. He stepped into the spotlight not as a contrite fraudster, but as a triumphant architect of the greatest joke of the age. His confession was not an apology, it was a victory speech. He laid out the entire scheme with meticulous detail, from the initial argument with the Reverend Turk to the secret carving in the Chicago barn and the midnight burial in Cardiff. He recounted his motivations with a cynical pride, explaining how his atheism and disdain for blind faith had driven him to create the ultimate test. He had proven his point beyond any doubt. The public, the press, and even respected scientists had all willingly embraced a lie because they wanted it to be true. The giant was his philosophical argument carved in stone, and the world had fallen for it. Hull seemed to relish the irony most of all, the fact that his elaborate prank had not only exposed public gullibility, but it also made him a very rich man. He had spent a fortune to create the giant, but the river of admission fees and the lucrative sale to the syndicate had repaid him many times over. His confession revealed a man satisfied not just with financial gain, but with the intellectual victory. He had set out to prove that belief could be manufactured, and in doing so, he had turned his personal skepticism into a national spectacle, leaving a legacy not of faith, but of delicious, undeniable doubt. So how does a nation react when its favorite miracle is exposed as a masterful lie? The initial public response was a bitter cocktail of shock and profound embarrassment. People who had paid their hard-earned 50 cents for a glimpse felt a sting of foolishness. Newspapers that had printed breathless, credulous reports now scrambled to cover their tracks, their tone shifting from wonder to righteous indignation. They painted George Hull as a villain, a cynical manipulator who had preyed upon the good faith of honest citizens. For a moment, it seemed the Cardiff Giant would be remembered only as a mark of shame on the national psyche, a testament to collective gullibility. But something surprising happened next. The anger began to curdle into a strange and unexpected admiration. The sheer scale of the deception, the meticulous planning, and the brilliant execution started to seem less like a crime and more like a work of art. People began to laugh, not just at themselves for being fooled, but with a kind of respect for the man who had fooled them so completely. The hoax was audacious, it was bold, and in a way, it was uniquely American. Hull was not some evil genius. He was a clever rogue who had outsmarted the experts and given the entire country a story they would never forget. The giant itself was quickly dubbed the Great American Humbug, a title that carried a wink of affection. It ceased to be a scientific curiosity and transformed into a cultural icon, a symbol of a young nation's capacity for both boundless optimism and a healthy dose of self-aware humor. The public did not discard the giant, they simply changed the story they told about it. It was no longer a petrified man, it was the ultimate prank, a legendary tall tale that just happened to be true in its own fantastic way. The giant's unmasking did not spell its end, but rather a new chapter in its peculiar life. Stripped of its mythical status as a petrified man, it was reborn as something perhaps even more compelling, America's most famous and beloved fraud. The public, once feeling cheated, now flocked to see the object of the great humbug, paying their admission with a sense of amusement rather than reverence. They were not coming to witness a miracle anymore, but to admire the sheer craftsmanship of the con. The giant passed through the hands of various showmen and syndicates, becoming a star attraction at fairs, carnivals, and dime museums across the country. It even spent time on display at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo in 1901, no longer presented as a prehistoric relic, but as a celebrated piece of national folklore, a testament to a good joke well told. Its journey was a testament to a fundamental shift in its identity. It was no longer defined by what people believed it was, but by the incredible story of how it had fooled them. For decades, the giant traveled, a rock and roll celebrity of the carnival circuit, outliving the very era that had given it birth. Its final and most fitting home came in 1948, when it was donated to the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York. There, just a few hours' drive from the farm where it was first discovered, the Cardiff Giant found its permanent resting place. You can still visit it today, lying in quiet dignity under a protective pavilion. It is no longer buried in a farmer's field, but it is forever entombed in the American imagination, a stone punchline to a joke that captivated a nation and taught a lasting lesson about the price of belief. The true power of the Cardiff Giant was never in the stone itself, but in the minds of those who beheld it. Our human psychology is wired for belief, and this hoax expertly played upon that wiring. One of the most potent forces at work was confirmation bias, our brain's natural tendency to seek out and favor information that confirms what we already want to be true. For a public steeped in biblical stories and spiritualist yearnings, the giant was not a strange rock. It was a divine validation. They saw the defined muscles and the peaceful expression, and their minds actively ignored the inconsistencies, focusing only on the details that fit their pre-existing narrative. It was not a matter of being stupid, it was a matter of seeing exactly what they hoped to find. This was amplified by the sheer power of suggestion. When a respected doctor declared the giant a petrified man, and when newspapers repeated the story with conviction, that collective agreement created a social reality that was difficult to question. You would have to stand against your neighbors, your community, and seemingly expert opinion. The desire to belong, to be part of a shared wonder, often overrides our individual skepticism. We are social creatures, and believing in the giant became a way of connecting with everyone else who was caught up in the excitement. This taps into something even deeper, our innate drive for pattern seeking. Our brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world, to find meaningful shapes in the chaos. The random textures created by the darning needles were not random to the eager observer. They were the pores of ancient skin. The pose of the arms was not a sculptor's choice. It was the final, peaceful gesture of a dying giant. We cannot help but see faces in clouds and figures in the stars, and the Cardiff Giant was the ultimate Rorschach test, a blank slate upon which an entire nation projected its deepest myths and desires. These myths were not invented in 1869. They were ancient. Stories of giants are a universal human archetype, found in the folklore of nearly every culture on Earth. From the Nephilim of the Old Testament to the Titans of Greek mythology, giants represent a primordial, powerful world that came before our own. The Cardiff Giant did not introduce a new idea. It simply gave a physical form to a story humanity had been telling for thousands of years. It made a deep-seated cultural memory feel tangible and real. So when you wonder how so many could be fooled, remember that they were not just looking at a statue. They were looking into a mirror, one that reflected their fears, their faith, and their timeless need for a world more magical than the one they knew. That stone giant refused to fade into obscurity after its unmasking. Instead, it embedded itself into the very fabric of American folklore, becoming a symbol much larger than its 10-foot frame. The story of the Cardiff Giant evolved from a news item into a timeless archetype, the great American humbug. It began appearing in popular songs and vaudeville acts, a punchline that everyone understood. Mark Twain, that sharp-eyed chronicler of human folly, was captivated by the affair. He wrote a hilarious short story titled A Ghost Story, where the narrator is haunted by none other than the Cardiff Giant itself, a brilliant satire on the nation's gullibility. The giant had become more than a fake fossil. It was now a character in our national narrative, a friendly ghost reminding us of our capacity for self-deception. This cultural footprint only grew with time. In the 20th century, the giant found new life on television, making cameo appearances in everything from classic westerns like Bonanza to the supernatural drama Buffy, the Vampire Slayer. Each reference was a wink to the audience, a shared cultural shorthand for a brilliantly executed con. The giant's journey from a farmer's field to the flickering screens in living rooms across the country proves that a good story, even a fraudulent one, has a vitality that often outlasts mere facts. It became a permanent part of our collective memory, a story we tell and retell not as a cautionary tale, but as a beloved piece of our quirky history. This legacy established a blueprint for deception that would be studied and imitated for generations to come. The principles George Hull mastered, the manipulation of media and the exploitation of public desire, became a playbook for future hoaxes. You can see the ghost of the Cardiff Giant in the infamous War of the Worlds radio broadcast by Orson Welles, which tapped into a deep-seated fear of alien invasion to create mass panic. You can see it in the modern crop circle phenomena, where intricate patterns in fields are interpreted as messages from beyond, fulfilling a contemporary longing for cosmic connection. The giant taught every future prankster a crucial lesson, that the most successful deception is not the one that is most technically perfect, but the one that tells people exactly what they are already hoping to hear. It is a story that resonates because it is not really about a giant, it is about us. The Cardiff Giant holds up a mirror to our own psychology, revealing how our beliefs can be shaped not by evidence, but by the stories we yearn to be true. This archetypal narrative of the humbug is now a fundamental part of the American identity, a testament to our unique blend of boundless optimism and a healthy, self-aware skepticism. We are a nation of dreamers, but we are also a nation that loves a good joke, especially when we are the punchline. The methods that fooled a nation in 1869 are more relevant than ever in our digital age. Think about the crop circles that began appearing in English fields during the 1980s. These intricate geometric patterns materialized overnight, sparking a wave of speculation about alien visitors and cosmic messages. They tapped into a deep, modern longing for connection with intelligent life beyond our world, a spiritual desire not so different from the 19th century's search for biblical proof. The public and media were captivated, with many insisting the designs were too complex to be human-made. Yet, just like the Cardiff Giant, they were eventually revealed as an elaborate, human-created hoax, a fact confessed by the very artists who crafted them with simple boards and ropes. They succeeded because they gave a physical form to a powerful, pre-existing myth, exploiting our pattern-seeking brains and our desire for the world to be more mysterious than it appears. This psychological playbook is replicated constantly online. A mysterious video purporting to show a ghost or an alien craft can go viral in hours, not because the evidence is strong, but because it aligns with what many people already hope or fear is true. The digital echo chamber amplifies this effect, creating a feedback loop where belief reinforces itself and dissenting voices are drowned out. The Cardiff Giant taught us that a successful hoax is not about perfect evidence, but about perfect timing, targeting a cultural nerve with precision. Today, that nerve is hit thousands of times a day, reminding us that while our tools have changed from chisels to clickbait, the human heart remains wonderfully and dangerously the same. Today, the Cardiff Giant rests in a place of honor, a permanent resident of the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York. It lies beneath a graceful, open-sided pavilion, protected from the elements but fully visible to any visitor who walks the grounds. This is not a hidden relic or a shameful secret tucked away in a basement. It is presented with pride, a celebrated piece of American history, its true story told on plaques and by knowledgeable guides. The giant is no longer a miracle to be worshipped, but a story to be understood, a physical artifact from a time when a nation grappled with its own beliefs. People do not kneel before it in awe, they stand beside it with a smile, often laughing as they learn the details of the grand deception. They take photographs not of a petrified man, but of a legendary prank. Its presence there is deeply symbolic, just a short journey from the farm where it was first discovered, completing a circle that began with a secret burial and ended with an eternal exhibition. This stone figure has outlived its creators, its detractors, and the entire world that first gave it meaning, yet it remains powerfully relevant. Why does this fake fossil deserve such a dignified and permanent home? Because it is a tangible touchstone to a pivotal moment in our cultural evolution. It represents the birth of modern media sensationalism, a case study in mass psychology, and a turning point where American skepticism began to mature. The giant is a teacher, a comedian, and a monument all rolled into one, reminding us that our history is not just written in treaties and battles, but also carved in stone by a cigar maker with a point to prove. To stand before it is to stand before a mirror reflecting our own endless capacity for wonder and the wisdom we gain when that wonder is playfully and brilliantly challenged. The giant story is not just a curious tale from the past, it is a masterclass in critical thinking. Its most enduring lesson is the profound danger of letting our desires override the evidence right in front of us. We all have a powerful tendency to accept information that confirms what we already believe or desperately hope is true, while dismissing or ignoring anything that contradicts it. The farmers and scientists who first saw the giant were not unintelligent, they were simply human. They wanted the world to contain biblical wonders, and so their minds eagerly connected the dots, transforming a carved stone into a divine sign. This same psychological trap is the engine of modern misinformation. We see it when we only follow news sources that align with our political views, or when we share a sensational story online because it feels true, not because we have checked its origins. The giant teaches us to be aware of this internal bias, to pause and ask ourselves a crucial question: am I believing this because it is factual, or because I want it to be factual? This simple moment of self-reflection is the first and most powerful step toward discernment. Beyond our own internal filters, the Cardiff Giant exposes the critical importance of verifying sources. In the 1860s, the authority of a local doctor or a newspaper was often enough to cement a belief. Today, that authority has been fragmented and amplified by the internet. Anyone can pose as an expert, and any story can be dressed up to look legitimate. The modern equivalent of the well digger's excited shout is a viral social media post, and the modern P.T. Barnum is an algorithm designed to capture your attention. The tools of deception have evolved, but the principle remains identical. Before we accept a claim, we must ask, where did this information come from? Who is the original source and what is their motivation? Are they a recognized expert in the field, or are they, like George Hull, a showman with a point to prove or a product to sell? Verifying a source is not about cynicism, it is about intellectual responsibility. It is the practice of looking past the thrilling headline to examine the foundation upon which the story is built. Ultimately, the hoax arms us with a healthy, proactive skepticism. This is not the same as outright disbelief or jaded cynicism, which closes the mind. True skepticism is an open but questioning mindset, a willingness to engage with amazing ideas while still asking for proof. It is the mental habit of looking for the chisel marks beneath the surface patina. In our current age, where spiritual claims and miraculous cures can be marketed directly to our deepest insecurities and longings, this skill is not just academic, it is a form of self-defense. Whether we are evaluating a new spiritual guru, a revolutionary health supplement, or a political promise, the same rules apply. Does the story rely solely on emotional appeal and anecdotal evidence, or is it supported by verifiable data and consistent logic? Are dissenting views being dismissed as the work of closed-minded elites, just as the geologist James Hall was shouted down? The Cardiff Giant's greatest gift was holding up a mirror to our own credulity. It reminds us that the most captivating stories are often the ones we need to question the most, not to rob the world of wonder, but to ensure our belief is placed in truths worthy of our faith. Could a hoax on the scale of the Cardiff Giant ever captivate us again? With satellites mapping every inch of the globe and the entirety of human knowledge in our pockets, it seems impossible. Yet the most powerful ingredient in any deception is not technology, but the timeless, unchanging nature of the human mind. We possess the same brains, wired for pattern recognition and story, that eagerly transformed a carved gypsum block into a biblical giant. Our modern tools have simply given these ancient instincts a global stage and a megaphone. Consider the recent fascination with mysterious monoliths that appeared in deserts around the world. These sleek metal structures materialized without explanation, sparking instant theories about alien visitors or secret art projects. The public and media were enthralled, not because the evidence was compelling, but because the mystery was. The objects tapped directly into a contemporary mythos, a collective yearning for enigmatic, otherworldly intelligence. They were a perfect blank canvas for our modern imaginations, just as the Giant was for a 19th century one. And just like the Giant, they were eventually revealed to be simple human art installations. The cycle was identical, only the delivery method had changed. This reveals a profound truth. Our access to information does not automatically grant us immunity to deception. In many ways, the digital age has made us more vulnerable. Algorithms carefully curate our information feeds, creating echo chambers that constantly reinforce our existing beliefs. A fraudulent story that aligns with our world, you can be shared 1,000,000 times before the truth has even put its boots on. We are swimming in a sea of data, but we are often drowning in confirmation bias, clicking on the links that tell us what we already want to hear. The modern George Hull does not need a barn in Chicago. He needs a convincing social media account and a viral marketing strategy. He preys not on biblical literalism, but on our deep-seated fears about our health, our politics, or our place in the universe. He offers simple, miraculous solutions to complex, terrifying problems. The packaging is new, but the psychological playbook was written over 150 years ago in a field in Cardiff, New York. Our capacity for belief and our susceptibility to a well-told story remains the most powerful and constant variable in the equation. That 10-foot block of carved gypsum ultimately became far more than its physical form. It completed a journey from a cynical atheist's private joke to a national icon of deception, holding a permanent mirror to our relationship with truth itself. The Cardiff Giant story is not merely a historical anecdote. It is a powerful allegory for the stories we choose to believe and why. It reveals how a narrative, once it takes root in the public imagination, can become more powerful and more real than the factual truth it obscures. The Giant's legacy is a testament to the uncomfortable yet vital space between what we wish were true and what the evidence tells us. It reminds us that our beliefs are not always formed in the clear light of reason, but are often shaped in the shadowy corners of our deepest desires and anxieties. This stone figure, born from a desire to mock faith, ironically became a monument to the very human need for wonder, a need that can be both a source of inspiration and a vulnerability to be exploited. Its enduring place in our culture asks us a fundamental question: are we the careful architects of our own beliefs, or are we, like the crowds in Stub Newell's field, simply following a story because it feels good to believe? This is the Giant's final and most profound lesson, a challenge to look beyond the comforting surface of a good story and to value the sometimes difficult, but always essential, pursuit of genuine truth. What other famous hoaxes have captured your imagination, only to later unravel? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation about the incredible tales we tell ourselves.